You ever heard that old saying, the love of money is the root of all evil? Well, really that's a distortion on the warning that is given in 1 Timothy 6. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And notice that Paul makes the distinction that it is the love for money and not the money itself, which is a root of all kinds of evil. You can do some very good things. You can do some very bad things with money. Our God is the God of divine love. Jesus spent his life teaching about this divine love. But the love of money is not divine. And it's not the type of love that Jesus was teaching about. This world loves money because with enough of it, people have power and control over others. It's a very simple formula. The more money, the more control over others. The more control equals more power. All of that power to control is addicting. Addiction is evil. It is one of the many kinds of evil. To love the addiction is the earthly type of love that Paul warns us about. Jesus preached against this earthly type of love. And the prophet Amos here this morning pronounces a curse on all who wield such evil control over the people, skimping the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. Then, and even now, the masses are at mercy of our grocers. Most people are not farmers. Most people do not have land to plant. Most people do not plant. Most people have no other way to get food than to go to the grocer. They must go to market. We have to trust that the butcher's thumb is not on the scale. We have to trust that the meter on the gas pump is giving an accurate flow of that very expensive petroleum that we pump into our vehicles. Amos charges that the merchants in his day had no reverence for God. They complained about having to stop their commerce to observe the Sabbath and other religious events such as the festival of the new moon, which is represented this morning. Amos cites them that they should put a major difference between the holy days and the regular days. But they had no affection at all for the Lord because their hearts were set in the world. They desired the fleeting things of this world over praising and worshiping God. When will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended, that we may market wheat? I can almost hear some of them complaining that they are doing too much for God with all of the interruptions to commerce. In short, God was costing them money. And because of all these religious days and holidays and the interruption of commerce, some of them, came to believe that they were almost forced to sell at a dishonest measure so as to boost the price and make up for the lost revenue. Some included even the sweepings with the wheat. The marketers were choosing love of money over love for God. The lone voice of Amos was calling them out. They were guilty of abusing the trust and mistreating the people. Amos promised that the Lord would not forget what they were doing. And I have no doubt believing that if Amos were in this time, he would still be calling for the need for those in the marketplace to turn back to glorifying God and away from their loving of the money. This morning in Sunday school, we also learned about a group of people, the Essenes, who were dedicated, so dedicated to living a life pleasing to God and not living in the sins of the world, that they actually separated and relocated themselves out of the populace and started living in the wilderness. The Essenes were a sect of the Second Temple scribes who flourished from the 2nd century BC up to the 1st century after Christ. They were part of the Sanhedrin, but were very much smaller group than the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they really only cared about pleasing God. They lived in various cities, but congregated in the pockets of communal lifestyle. There is no sign of them having love of money among them for the things that they could buy. They pooled their resources and they lived a true communal life. Monastic, almost, like the monks. The Essenes only wanted to live outside of the community because the community was in sin. And they separated themselves from that. They strove for complete abstinence from worldly pleasures, even including celibacy. The documents that the Essenes wrote were what caused them their most, it's why we remember them today. The Dead Sea Scrolls, written, called that because they were written next to the Dead Sea and the hills and caves there. And the documents include multiple copies of the Hebrew Bible, untouched since 300 BC. No one knew of these documents until they were discovered in 1947, and these writings helped to validate many of the Old Testament scriptures. The Dead Sea Scrolls are currently housed at the Palestine Archaeological Museum. And having been written on parchment paper mostly, much of the scrolls are fragments and small pieces that the scholars are still poring over. But so far, all the Old Testament books, except for the book of Esther, have been represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And for that, we thank the Essenes. The comment that I was drawn to this morning was the Essenes weren't for the people at that time. They were for us after 1947 because they validate the early writings. Now, today's parable with Jesus. It's a difficult one. It's one I've always struggled with. Questions like, why would Jesus make an example for godly living seem so unsavory and unappealing? The parable centers around someone who has the lifestyle exactly opposite of what Christ taught. The parable centers around someone whose life is the love of money. And he apparently is never remorseful for any of his mishandling of his master's trust. Jesus weaves a story even around this character. The man is a shyster and a lazy, conniving, self-centered manager of someone else's treasure. I've never met him, but I feel kind of confident in saying that. He's only out for his own personal gain, and he only wants to save his own skin. We follow this story with great interest, however, because it's told well, and because we want to see this scoundrel get what's coming to him at the end. And at the end, when the master finally speaks, it is somewhat shocking. While it is a compelling story, I found the ending to be anything but satisfying. Because instead of being defeated, the scoundrel is actually hailed as a triumph. His plan succeeds. His former boss, the one whose estate he previously mismanaged, now praises him for being ingenious. There's a German word, and I think it's Schadenfreude or something like that, and I believe its meaning is that you find happiness in someone else's misfortunes. And I have to admit that when I first read this parable, I experienced, or thought I was going to experience, that German word Schadenfreude. And then there's a disbelief that the manager does not get his due. And at that first reading, the lesson of this parable was lost on me. And I referred to it over the years every now and again, and I still didn't get it. And it actually took this week's study of it for me to come to a new understanding of it. And I believe I understand what Jesus was doing here. At the end, Jesus says that the scoundrel understands this world better than the believers, the people of the light. Before this week, I struggled with the notion that there was nothing redemptive or redeemable for me to learn from this parable. I was confused that Jesus would teach something that had no apparent moral or ethical value. And I was wrong. Because I thought that the manager was going to give his master even less. By having the debts to his master adjusted without including his very high commission attached to them, I missed that point. And I was annoyed at the idea that by him having the debts settled at cost was celebrated as brilliant. But foregoing his commission was the correct thing for him to do, and it was acknowledged as a shrewd and brilliant business behavior. He was praised by everyone, even Jesus. Verse 9. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwelling. For the record, I can now see the wisdom that Jesus taught. We are currently living in this world, and Jesus wants us to be happy and successful in this world. We are to manage in this world what we are given so as to deal effectively and fairly with each other, so that we may gain lasting friendship. By being trustworthy in the small and worldly things, we will have proven that we can be trusted with what is to be given us in the next world. And that's where the parable centers. It's at the end of the story, but it's a central point. The heavenly realm of God. This was one of those times when the light came on, I felt both foolish and excited at the same time. I was satisfied that I finally got what Jesus wanted me to learn, and foolish that it took me so long to understand my Lord's meaning, and even more that I should have ever doubted him at all. Before this parable, Jesus, immediately in the Bible, before this parable, Jesus speaks another parable about the prodigal son. And the parable shows obvious parallels in the two stories and differences. In both parables, there is a subordinate, the child in the first, and the manager in the second one. And these two stories are about people who squander the goods of a superior. Before the child and the manager are in the end received back and celebrated, even commended. This formal similarity, however, masks a very important thematic difference. The shrewdness, unlike the son, the steward, is not penitent for what he did. He never takes responsibility for what got him in trouble in the first place, and the rich man, unlike the father, does not forgive the squandering of his resources, but rather commends the manager's shrewdness in how he dealt with his problem, escaping punishment. Sort of like a liar who is praised for the craftiness of his lies rather than for being a liar. In addition, another difference in the two parables is the morality that's at play with the prodigal son. When he returns to the Father, he is a good worker. He works well, and his story is a good lesson for us to learn. Before this week's study, I missed the whole underlying point, and that is, after being released for squandering the master's money, I thought that the steward went on to squander even more, and by reducing, he would actually be given his master far less than what was due, and that was not the point. The unrepentant manager had the notion that by eliminating his own commission, he was given the impression to the debtors that he was providing them generous gifts. And through his apparent gift to the debtors, the manager was not working to free them of their debt, but he was actually indebting them to him. He was working to get something from them in the form of return gift, the gift of support. When he was thrown out on the street, if you will, when he had lost his job, he was hoping that this generous action that he was appearing to the debtors would be returned as food or a place to stay or some kind of providing for this manager when he had not the ability to do the labor or the desire to do the begging. They would feel the need to provide for him was his goal. And I guess in that, he was genuinely understanding of his situation. And he was shrewd in how he dealt with it. But even then, I don't see the master ever trusting him again, because he was not trustworthy with what was given him. He proved that while he may have escaped the punishment that he probably deserved, I don't think the master would have gone ahead and kept him at his job. He probably was removed as manager. He just wasn't necessarily punished for mismanagement. And we're not giving any more information about him. The story ends. Now, the theme of this sermon today has come in 3 parts, and all of them are about money. The love of money being a root of all evil because of the power and control it tends to bring with it. The love of money by merchants, instead of them joyously celebrating and worshiping God, and the foregoing of potential money by the dishonest manager in order to save his own skin. All this to say, you cannot serve God and money. One you will be your master, and the other will be your foe. One you will hate, like the Essenes hated the sins of this world, and you will have the love of the other. You will be devoted to one as the Essenes were devoted to God, and you will despise the other. It may be possible for you to handle both for a while, but one day the time will come when you will be called to make your choice. Jesus promises us that when you prove yourself worthy by being in love with the Lord, you will be given even more. You will be shown your name in the book of life, and you will be welcomed into eternity by the God of eternity. That's what you take from this today. When you are trusted and proved worthy with what you have been given in this world, you will be well rewarded in the next by the God of love, who truly loves you. Amen. Well lifted knee, 453 in the maroon.